Welcome back. So in this series, we're building a status of funds for a AFRIC unit, and we've got our tables from FAOC and PBAS, and we've added to them. We've put in some VLOOKUPs, and all I've done since then, even though it's not on the video, is I added the RCCC name to the AFAOC one, and because I'm using two different units for the AFAOC status funds and the PBAS, I wanted to make sure I had unit information in there. So I added the RCCC's names and the project names in the previous one, but the one thing I added when the video was not rolling was I added additional information both on the RCCC's and on the projects. And I want to show you real quick what I did. Again, I used the same technique using a VLOOKUP, but this time I added a third column in my RCCC table. And what I did there is I grouped together different RCCCs. And what this gives you the ability to do is to identify RCCCs for specific programs, which is what an RCCC is supposed to do. The first two digits are supposed to be the group, the second two are supposed to be the squadron, and the fifth and sixth digit, last two, are supposed to be the program. So it gives you the ability to break out multiple programs under one squadron or multiple programs under a group or kind of different things. But in this case, I wanted to specify groupings of squadrons to be unit money, some to be special programs, others to be part of the group. And this is not any bearing on the unit. This is simply me adding this at random. But I want to show you what that looks like for a pivot table. Additionally, I added for the projects, you can see here, this is what we added in the video, but I went ahead and added the third column from this table. So I have a more specific look at officer enlisted for the different types of RPA that we're using. So if I want to see specifics on the TEEPs or specifics on the AT, I can look at officer enlisted. I have that breakout if I so need it. And I would encourage you to do this every time you get data and you need to break it out further and you want to use a table to do that. Get it, bring it out there, bring it into this table. And the nice part is every time you refresh your data, your actual data will refresh and your table information that you added should just update with it. So I do want to do a little bit of cleaning while I'm here. And so some of the things I wanted to highlight is I've got a lot of NAs here for the RCCC. Now it's likely that's because some of these RCCCs were utilized at some point, but are no longer being utilized. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how you can update that. I'm going to simply click in the cell, hit Control-C to copy, and I'm going to add it to my list here. And I usually do it by special value. And again, I can add it to this. I don't know what this is used for. I'm just going to put it in there. Some people have CivPay specific lines, and I'm just going to mark this as CivPay. Again, that's not truly, well, in this case it is, but that's not necessarily what this is for. But you can see it kind of updates. I'm going to do the next two as well, and those are both travel. Oops, that's all the same RCC, so I'm just going to copy it, and again, paste it by value here. And I don't necessarily know what this is for. This is the more specific one, so I'm just going to put Civ Travel and put CivPay in there. And again, that way I can kind of look at all of my CivPay under one grouping. And again, it's probably won't even show up on current year. Let's look real quick. Yeah, it's a prior year document or type of funds, so it's probably not going to show up in the status of funds when I'm building the pivot table, but it's a good way to look at your stuff if you want to break it out like that. So it's just one way to fix the NAs. I'm going to leave the rest out there, however, so that way you can kind of see how this will look in the pivot tables. So at this point, we've got our two pivot tables, we've got some basic naming conventions, and we're going to go ahead and start adding pivot tables. I'm going to do that by clicking Insert, Add Pivot Table. It's going to ask me which table do I want. This is table 1. We can look to see if it engulfs everything. It does. And I know that because of this little flashy line. I don't know if you can see it here. You can kind of see this little bracketed thing moving that's putting it around the entire table. If it's in a true table format, you can put table 1, you can add to this table, and it will be included in your pivot data. I'm going to click OK. So now it's going to bring me to this screen. Now, over here, there's nothing to do. You see 4 different columns. You'll see filters, columns, rows, and values. So rows and columns work just like they do in Excel. Here's a row, columns named are alphabetically input in there, rows are numbered, and then the values of what it is, and then you can add filters. And as we're doing that, I'm going to, on my other screen, I'm going to bring up another unit's data and see how they've got it broken out. And I'm just going to kind of mirror that. So one of the things that they have is by RCCC, they've picked out, for example, 727. So again, you can add in, because we're doing this off the AFAOC one, you can add in your BLI into the rows, and it will list all of them that you have out there. Now, immediately, if I put a value in there, so let's say gross obligations into our values, it's going to start spitting out numbers. I'm going to highlight all of this just to make it a little bit cleaner, and I'm going to go click Home and dollar amounts. So it kind of gives us a nice fresh look. But we know that our AFAOC data is got all prior fiscal years in there. So we may want to filter some of that out. So one way we could do that is find our period of availability, fund POA, and I want to put that in filter. And then it'll stick it up at the top here, and I can click on this drop down, click select multiple, and I can uncheck all, and I just want to see the current fiscal year. So now I can see all of our obligations by our project by current fiscal year. Now you can see these A, G, and Z in there. We know those are O&M, so maybe we want to filter that out too. So I'm going to take my main, and I'm going to stick it in the filter as well. And I'm going to go ahead and filter to our RPA. Whoops. There we go. So now we know what our current RPA is, and we know what our gross obligations are. But like most of you, we don't want to leave it just at gross obligations. We want to know what our authority is. So I'm going to go ahead and stick in available authority and subsequent available authority. And if you notice, it did available authority, but it's starting to count the subsequent available authority. I don't know if there's anything in here, but I'm going to go ahead and change that. I'm going to click over here to count, and I'm going to click value field settings. And I can change it from count to sum of. And it simply works like that. Again, I'll show you what that looks like with the available authority. If you want to count, it's simply going to count how many items of available authority there are. That's not really useful to us, so I'm going to switch it back to summing it so we can see our dollar amount. So now we have our authority. Now there's nothing in subsequently available authority, so I'm just going to kind of remove it for now. And then maybe we want to see our commitments, our obligations, and our paid in there. So that immediately kind of gives us a breakout of where things are obligated and what is paid. And it kind of gives us a good idea. We're using current year dollars, we're using RPA, and here's the breakout. But if you remember, we also added naming conventions. So I'm just going to come down here and go to the project names, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to my names. And you see it breaks it out. It puts it at the top and kind of filters down. That's one way to look at this. Now, you can also do it by object class. That's one way we have it in here. We click our object class and stick it in here, and you can see the different object classes that are popping up. So these 117s are pay. I would encourage you to always use a object class that has the last 4 digits filled in and not leave it at all zeros. But as long as there isn't guidance out there on that, then for now we can use the all zeros. But I would encourage you to get more specific and actually load funds to something more specific. 210 is our travel, so we can see money is loaded to travel here. So again, it just kind of gives us a breakout. But I, for one, don't particularly care for this view where you have the 721, kind of the subtotals up at the top, and then where it breaks it down. I feel like this kind of gets confusing. So what I like to do is I like to click in my table and click on Design and go to Report Layout and go to Tabular Format. And what this does is it breaks those 3 out. If you use compact format, it kind of puts them all together, and you can see your 3 layers here all in one column. So if you're looking at lots of data, sometimes that's helpful, but to me, I get distracted by these bolded ones versus the unbolded ones, and I don't always know where it sums the data. So again, I can fix that by going to tabular format, and what that does is it then breaks out and it tells me what the totals are. And in this case, I don't necessarily need the subtotals here. So one way I can do this is I can click on subtotals and click Do Not Show Subtotals, which would break it out, take off all the subtotals, undo that. But maybe I want to subtotal my projects and not my the blend name. So I'm just going to right-click and unclick subtotal here. And that way I can kind of put it together. Now, another thing that tends to be confusing is the data is the same as the subtotal data, with the exception of the subtotal is bolded. So you can come down here and play with different formats. And this is the one that I typically choose because it highlights the subtotals in a slightly different way, so that way you can easily see where it's breaking out. So that kind of gives us an idea of the breakout of the blends, which are projects, and the dollar amounts associated with them and how much we have loaded there. And again, since I've got the 721, I don't necessarily need the full blend in here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove that. And I can do that from here and pull it over. Another thing you might want to do or consider is if you right-click on this and go to Pivot Table Options, you can go to Display, and there's this classic pivot table layout. I like doing that. And what that gives you the ability to, if you saw everything shift, it gives you the ability to click and drag and drop from filter to your rows. So I can just go ahead and move that up there and say, hey, I'm not going to need that. And it, again, filters it down. But maybe I want some of that more specific data that I previously had mentioned. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop this in here. Well, now I can see, because of those naming conventions, how much specifically an AT enlisted and AT officer I've spent, but I can also see where it's loaded. I can see in clothing where it's spent out for enlisted. I can see these IDTs out there. I can see the school travel, all because of the naming conventions that I put on those. And again, if you don't always need to see that because I've got it in the classic setting, I can always pull it back up and make it a little bit simpler. It gives you the ability for much quicker analysis based on your common themes that you need. Now, if I really like this pivot table, or I'm going to have more pivot tables, one thing I would recommend is don't keep clicking on Insert New Pivot Table, because when you do that, it builds a new cache for that next pivot table. Instead, what you could do is right-click and click Move or Copy, and create a copy and move the sheet before the next one, which you didn't do. Create a copy and move sheet before sheet 2. There you go. So now I've got 2 with the exact same pivot table. And then the benefit of doing this is by not creating a second cache is it keeps your file size fairly low. It allows you to build multiple pivot tables using one cache. And this is my pivot table that I use for my unit. And if you notice, I have lots of pivot tables down here. And the reason I'm able to do that is because it's all built off of one cache. I simply copy a pivot table over, and then I'm able to manipulate the pivot table from there. But I keep it with one cache, keeping the file size low allows me to have multiple pivot tables using the same data. So I'd encourage you to do that. If you keep creating a new pivot table, you'll create a new cache, and then every time you open up Excel, you're going to have cache on top of cache, and it's just going to make the file size balloon up pretty quickly. So going back to our pivot tables, this was broken out by project code. So I'm just going to rename this real quick so I don't get confused by project. We'll go by FY. So I'm going to use the same data here, but maybe I'm curious what we've spent year over year. So I'm going to go ahead and take out all of our available data, and I just want gross obligations. And I'm going to take my funds this time, our POA, and I'm going to put it in as a column, and I'm going to unfilter it so I can see everything. And what that does is it gives me the ability to see year over year how much money we've spent. And again, I can go back into that specific project and pull it down. And if I put it between these two columns, if you can see that green line, put it between those two columns, I can get the same breakout, and I can see year over year how much we've spent in enlisted and officer AT. From there, I can easily get a good idea of what our averages are. For example, I could just highlight here and look at the bottom, and I can see on average, we're spending about $183,000 in our AT for enlisted. That's a pretty quick and easy way to do some analysis. And now I'm able to provide that information. So I can see right here, if we're generally doing about 180,000, even though we're halfway through the year, we're only a third of the way through what we would normally spend in a fiscal year. So I would say that our enlisted have some duty that they probably need to still pull. So that's a great way to be able to quickly analyze and give some insight into your data. Again, it doesn't give you the complete story, but it gives you the financials and gives you the ability to kind of gauge that a little bit better. So this first one was by project. This one we've broken out by FY, which is what I intended for this one here. So we'll just rename this one. We're going to name this one O&M, and we're going to show you some tricks with O&M, and I'll rename this one project by FY. And we'll show you some, go back to the O&M here, and we'll look at O&M. All right, so here we're seeing our object classes broken out. So I can already see here where we've got money loaded, where we've had money loaded. But again, we know that this isn't the full picture, right? We've got them done by SAGs. Now, SAGs they're important to make sure that we stay within the SAGs, and if we have SAG limitations, that we stay within those. But for the most part, that's not how units look at their funds. So I'm going to take out the project, and I'm going to go down to that RCCC name that we built, and I'm going to go ahead and stick that in there. So now I can see, hey, all of these are hitting CivPay. That's a quick, easy way to look at that. And here's some other ones that we've identified. And the only one that's really popping up right now is the 415th. So that tells me I probably need to do some movements right here. But for ease of use, I'm just going to go back to FY23 so I can show you what that looks like. So that kind of gives you a little bit better of a breakdown where people are spending. Not much better, to be honest with you. And that has everything to do with the naming conventions that we put on it, because I don't know this unit very well, so I can't build off of theirs. I would have to know what their units are. But one of the things that I can do is I can go, well, that's a lot of CivPay in here. And generally units CivPay is easily identified, and it's not a commodity that we have a lot of discretion over. So what we can do is we can go ahead and decide to identify how much CivPay we want to filter out pretty easily, to be honest with you. And we're going to do that by going back to our data, and we're going to go, everything that's generally starts with a 1 is CivPay. So I'm going to add in another column here, and I'm just going to put CivPay. So it creates the column, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a yes, no. And I'm going to do that by creating a if-then function. I'm going to create equals if. And so it's asking me first for the logic test. So I'm going to come over here to my OSC. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to say if OSC, actually, I'm going to stop real quick because I clicked on the wrong cell. In my off-screen example, because I have to have an example in front of me to guide me. So I'm going to if logic test, where is it? OSC. Sorry, I'm using my other status of funds as a background, and I have a little bit more complex tables in there. So, for example, I have all of my RCCCs, or excuse me, all of my object classes named, so that way all my CivPay comes up as CivPay, and I didn't do that for this example. But you could identify easily. Here, we could do OSC left 1, and we could go equals left. It's going to ask you left of what. I'm going to say my OSC, which is your object class, comma 1, comma, oops, I don't need anything else, close parentheses, and that's going to give me the first number in the OSC. So I can then write a CivPay, and I'm going to say equals if our OSC item, whoops, equals if our OSC left 1 equals 1, then if it's going to return back, I'm going to have a Y, and if it doesn't, I'm going to have a N. So again, that's just giving you a quick true false kind of measurement. So now if I come back to my O&M status funds, I'm going to right click and click refresh, and it's going to add in those things we just put in. So I'm going to stick this in my filters at top, and I'm going to click CivPay no, and see it filter out all of my CivPay because they all start with a 1. And that's a lot easier to see as far as a customer goes. It's a lot easier to understand, okay, I only need to learn a couple of object classes, and then I can know where I'm spending my money. So again, just options available to you and how you might want to adjust what your data is saying for quick, easy analysis. So with that said, I'm going to also kind of build out now based off the example that was provided to me. And this example came from the 413th. And so they've got one that's built off of their PBAS fund status reports. Now, I said before to copy and paste the previous pivot tables, but in this case, because it's a different background data, I have to create a new pivot table, but this will be the first pivot table that I create using this data, and I'm not going to do one, create a new one from that data. I'll only copy this one. So in this case, they have their object classes, which in this case is our project, and I'm going to use it by our project name. That gives me a clear indicator, both of the project number and a kind of a naming convention that gives us a little bit more information. And then from there, they have it by their unit. And so I'm going to go ahead and use our RCCC name. And so it kind of breaks out. In this case, I'm using my units data because I don't have access to their PBAS information. So it's my fund status report kind of showing where it is. And then they've got their annual target in there. They've got their sum of annual balances. They've got their sum of gross commitments, their obligations, their UOOs, and their AEPs. And this is kind of almost exactly what they have, except they didn't have the naming convention, so they have their what codes in here, and then they have it by 721 information that's on the PBAS information here from the project. And again, if I wanted to copy that exactly, I would simply take out the project and our CC name, and I could put in my project here, and then I could type in or have my what codes. This is exactly how they have it broken out, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It works really, really well. Again, I like being able to copy and paste this when I do my FWGs and FMBs, so I like those naming conventions in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and swap those out again. So I'm going to have project and RCCC. I'm just going to pull these ones out. So one of the things that they've got on here, or something that would be beneficial, I think, the fund status reports is only by this fiscal year. So there's no need to add fiscal year data on it, but I do want to change my layout so that way it kind of goes back to that tabular layout. Again, this is more of a preference thing than anything, but it just gives that nice kind of clean look. And it gives me the ability to identify specifics and just go, hey, I just want to look at 721. Again, that's more of a preference thing than anything. So that's one of the pivot tables that they have built. I'm going to go ahead and label this, rename it. The same thing they did. PBAS pivot. And then I'm going to break it out another table. And again, I'm going to right click, move or copy. I'm just going to pick the PBAS pivot that we just had and create a copy. Now, if you remember, I said here, I've got the red data. I'm going to move it over to the side, and I've got data here. So I'm going to go ahead and color that one red. And then this one, I'm going to rename this one to tables. And I'm going to label this in kind of a yellowish color. Yellow and orange. Let's do it in orange. And what that does is it provides me to know that this is my raw data, these are my tables, and then these are my tables that I'm actually going to be moving around. So again, we copied this one forward, so I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to do PBAS by unit. So again, PBAS is telling me where I'm pulling the data from, and now I don't want to see it by 721. I want to see it by just the unit. So I'm going to take my project, and again, if you notice, I don't have this one in the classic field setting, so I can't drag and drop. I would have to do it from here. So one of the things you do is you can move it down like that, and it swaps. So now I can see it by unit and what the breakout is. Or I could switch it to the classic view. And then it gives me that drop filters here. And then I can kind of move here and put it up here if I wanted to see it like that. But that kind of gives us a good breakout of what the expectation is. Now, in their case, they have it by unit. They have all of the same information, but they don't have it by project name. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick that one up here. So again, they've got the breakout that kind of looks like this. And then below that, they have an O&M pivot table to kind of mirror what they have available. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste starting from here, cancel. I'm just going to copy and paste this entire thing, Control C, and put it right under here using Control V. Nope, it didn't like that. All right, let's try this again. Control C, Control V, there it goes. So now we can see the exact same thing if we wanted to. So again, we're on O&M right now. So let's switch this over to RPA so we can see it. And then again, they've kind of got their stuff broken out, not by unit, but by program. So again, we can take a look at the data available to us for this one. And that kind of works. So what we might want to do is just move our CC or OSC up. So now I'm kind of looking at similar information, but that's what they had. They had their, in this case, total authority. So let me show you a trick with total authority. So in themes, we have subsequent authority and available authority. And you can kind of see that here, subsequent authority and available authority. Generally, when they issue funds, it makes it available, but some MAJCOMs like to issue funds early if they're planning on putting it in your themes to have available to you, and they'll do that in subsequently available authority. And that what that does is it gives you a more or less a planning number to identify how much you should be getting there without being able to do it. So one thing that many units like to do is do what's called total authority, which is combining these two. And you can do that in a couple ways. You could create a new column and identify these two, or you can do it another way. I'm going to try it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Pivot Table Analysis, and I'm going to do a calculated field. It's going to bring this up, and I'm going to name this field Total Authority. And what I can do here is go into my Available Authority, and I'm going to insert field, and I'm going to hit a plus sign and Subsequent Authority, and click OK. And now it gave me a field that's called Total Authority. That is not in my initial pivot table, but it is an option that I can pick here. And so it gives me an ability to do a calculated column and do total authority. If you're being issued subsequently and available, total authority is generally one way to combine those two. So I'm going to take out my available authority. And what that does is it just tells my units what their total dollar amount is going to be. Again, on this pivot table, we've got available authority. But now if I refresh this, see if it'll do it. It did. I've got my total authority there. So I'm going to take this guy out, and I'm going to put in total authority. I've got my commitments, and in this case, they don't have obligations or AEP. They do have total authority uncommitted. So we're going to go with our uncommitted, and then they've got available obligation authority. So this is, I believe, our uncommitted dollars. So that's ultimately kind of how it looks like. At this point, we're going to kind of stop this video because it's been a long one, but it kind of gives you an idea of how you can use pivot tables for different analysis. And I'm going to finish building out the pivot tables that they gave me, and I'm going to kind of add in some stuff. And what I'm going to do in the next video is talk about more of kind of cleaning up these pivot tables so that way they're usable by our customers.